indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. This evening we have a follow-up to the 3/10 sales tax ballot initiative, and Jason Hilders is our Deputy City Manager who's going to be presenting. Hey, Jason.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. This evening we've got a pretty lengthy presentation, so I'll go ahead and jump into it. Wanted to provide you all an update on where we are with the 6 major projects that were part of the November ballot last year that failed. Quickly, the levee raise, the runway out at the airport, both Aggieville and North Campus comprehensively, just as infrastructure improvements. The Douglas Center, which you approved December 17th, and then the joint maintenance facility, which we're out for construction manager at risk proposals right now. So the vision for Manhattan, all these projects represent us maintaining or enhancing infrastructure to remain stable, viable, and attractive. Our health, safety, and economic vitality are all keys to our mission within the city, and all the improvements that we've talked about, down to levees and streets and sidewalks and all the city facilities, all factor into that environment where our mission is determined and defined. A lot of our efforts over the last 5 to 10 years have been trying to determine where we want to grow and where we want to provide that opportunity. We have a lot of infrastructure in this community, a lot of streets, water, sewer, and storm, tremendous amount of inventory. It continually needs to be reinvested in. When we look at downtown in Aggieville, the city as well as private businesses have made sizable investments. A significant amount of public infrastructure is in both of those corridors, just frankly from the streets, sidewalks, and alleys. We don't do that anywhere else in the community to that degree. And we have focused on these 2 areas to make previous investments, some 30, 40 years ago, some 10 years ago. They will continually be in Manhattan's view and part of that vision moving forward. Sizable investments in the 1980s in Aggieville. Twice now in downtown we've seen significant investments in revitalization efforts. K-State, obviously extremely important to our economy and our community. The investments that they are making and have been making are also extremely sizable. As an employer and just an economic driver in the region, we recognize the infrastructure that is adjacent to campus has a significance as well. It's how people get there. It's how people get away from there. It's an opportunity for us always to look at how attractive we can assist the university in being within our community. When we talk about investing as a community, the majority of what we bring before you is about repairing or replacing major infrastructure that we have in this community. This again allows the public to access these areas and allows the private sector to take advantage of those investments. That sense of place that we talk about, we've talked about it in downtown twice with the mall, the north end, the south end. We've talked about it in Aggieville, and creating a destination, of an area that's attractive where people will want to come to Manhattan. So much of our economy is based on our visitors. We're a regional shopping center. We do $27 million annually just in hotel business. There's a lot about what we do that generates an attractiveness. So when we get into these areas and these opportunities, we take a long, hard look. And we've done that for a long period of time. No different than the last 5 years in the areas that we've focused on. These 6 major projects have been a culmination really of over close to a decade worth of work. We've been in the North Campus corridor since 2014. President Schultz appointed a task force. We were a part of that. We've worked on it for a long time and have reached a point where we're just now starting construction. Aggieville, we've been at it for 5 years. The levee, since the '93 flood, quite honestly, the staff and engineering Corps of Engineers have responded to that event, and with continual analysis given us now an improvement that we can move forward with. Runway at the airport remains a vital piece of infrastructure moving forward. Our maintenance facility is obviously probably 80 years of use within existing facilities. It's time, and it's in an opportunity where we have adjacent neighbors that are interested in the properties that we occupy today. It's an opportunity we feel like we're ready to take care of or take advantage of. The Douglas Center, obviously, you've all considered and we're moving forward with. A lot of our discussion has been how to pay for these things. And we've identified multiple sources for a lot of our projects. None of them were predicated on that sales tax passing. We understood that from the get-go, but we have identified a $70 million gap in these $170 million worth of projects. And that gap, there was a strategy to put that sales tax out and help fill that gap. If that sales tax doesn't fill it, we got to look to other places and other revenue streams to figure out how to pay for those things or bypass those projects. So as a reminder, the question didn't have a sunset. It was a general question for the general purpose of operating as a city. It was intended to be in place for a long time. We had even showed 30 years of revenue stream coming in to help offset not only the principal of that $70 million, but the interest associated with it. It failed, obviously, as most of you are aware, 4,187 votes no, 3,359 yes. That's a difference of 828. You can see 415 changed their mind. It swings that vote. That's 5%, 5.5% of the total votes cast. That 7,500 number we feel like is important when you compare that number to what is going to come in the 2020 election. 2016, another presidential election, we had over 16,500 votes cast. And that was specifically for our street maintenance tax. There were more than that cast. We just lost a few voters by the time we got to our question at the end of the ballot. But that's over twice as many voted this past November. We recognize those dynamics are different, and they're something to be considered when you think about what should be on November of 2020 ballot. Our current economic development tax as part of a Riley County sales tax expires in 2022. Some discussion we've had at the retreat here of late talked about renewing that, and Rich Vargo expressed that the county commissioners do have an interest in renewing that. They control that question being placed on the ballot. They would approach the city about how we would plan to use that 62% of the revenues, but they wouldn't necessarily need the city to concur with placing that question on the ballot. That has a different dynamic to be considered moving forward. We've talked about asking a question as a city only, going within the city boundaries, both in Riley County and Pot County, just the city limits boundary, and what that half-cent could generate compared to the half-cent that Riley County brings forward. It's a difference of about $3.5 million in terms of what we could leverage from the same half-cent within the community. It's significant. Aggieville and North Campus, we've talked about a different strategy of approaching those as a 10-year question with a sunset date, that the question was specific to either of those areas, anywhere from a 0.1, 0.15, 0.2 for each of those. Those are the types of gaps we're looking at for both of those projects. A 0.15 for each generates roughly $15 million over that 10-year period that can be offset for those purposes. Those are part of the options, as you'll see later in the presentation. So 2020 and beyond, tonight is a lot about the strategy moving forward to finance. We know there's a mill levy involved in the bond and interest. It has fluctuated over the years. There's an understanding of where folks like to be in terms of how much debt we want to incur and how much of that should be supported by the property taxes. Each of you probably have your own philosophical approach to that. In years past, we know with downtown, we were ranging anywhere from 6 to 8 mills that were supporting a bond and interest at that time. And we had early forecasts from finance that took us into double digits mill levy increases, or total mill levy supporting the bond and interest for downtown. It never reached that point. We were fortunate enough to structure a lot of our debt in a way that our mill levy could support it without significant increases, but you have also had valuation increases within the community that were helping offset any type of mill levy increase. We've got 10-year sales tax questions to consider. As I mentioned, those can be specific. They can target certain areas. We've done those before. We've been successful with those. It leaves the voter knowing exactly what they're voting on. Our prior question, a lot of the feedback we've received, and I'm sure you have too, the general nature of it, the permanency of it, were two things that we heard as a negative in terms of structuring the question that way. The Eco-Devo renewal, and I get into this a little bit later too, our Economic Development Fund right now, 35% helps bond and interest on the debt service side, 65% is left for economic development purposes. And that's been really shuffled between jobs and infrastructure. Heavy on the infrastructure in the last 10 years or 8 years. We've really only incentivized one company that is still in existence. We have one that's failed and the other more recently that we've heard not likely to move forward with our project. They also have revenues from user fees, utilities, water, sewer, storm. Those are within the control of the commission based on an annual decision to appropriate and approve a budget. And clearly those are part of a lot of the strategies we have in these 6 major initiatives. So the levy today in 2020 for Manhattan is just over 156 mills. And you can see the breakdown there between the city, Riley County, USD 383, and the state. Those have obviously increased from years past. Most of the levy increases have been due to things that we've seen in the community. The school district more recently with their bond issue. City, we've had a fairly flat mill levy for about 3 years now, but we were around 43, 45 in years past. And through growth and through other obligations, those have increased over time. As far as the debt's concerned, right now we have around $236 million in outstanding debt. 4.7 of our 49 mills are dedicated to the bond and interest fund. When you look at that 4.7 compared to the 156 mills that are levied in our community, less than 3% of the mill levy is actually dedicated to debt retirement for city at large projects. I point that out because I think it's significant. It's one of the more significant things we do in this community is invest in our infrastructure and invest in our facilities. This is where that debt service is being paid, and it is a very small percentage of what you pay in overall taxes as a residence or as a business. Here's our mill levy for the past 6 years, and as I mentioned, we had those increases in 15 and 16, but we've held pretty steady from 17, 18, 19, and 20. This is a breakdown of our levy. This is something that we provide you all every year through budget process. This is 19, and the next sheet is the 20 mill rate. And it just kind of shows you the difference between the 49.355 and the 49.798. And you can see the differences in the general fund. We had a slight increase from 6.57 to 6.74. And the bond and interest fund grew, actually reduced from 4.939 down to 4.687. I point out those two mill levies because that 11.5 roughly mills out of the 156 are what we spend about 5 months talking about. That is the impact to our general fund for our operating purposes, and that is the impact to the debt service that is controlled or participated by property taxes. This is the majority of what we talk about. The other mill levies, the Employee Benefit Fund, Fire Equipment Reserve, General Improvements, Park Development, you see those have been zeroed out and have been zeroed out for several years now. KP&F fluctuates, Industrial Promotion zeroed out. Those 11.5 are primarily what we discuss on an annual basis. And again, of 156 mills, a total in terms of what taxpayers are paying at the beginning of the year and in May, it's less than 10%. The 16.899 is roughly 11% of the total bill. Now you add in PD, library, and the Library Employee Benefit Fund, now you're up to 49.798. That's 16.899, or really the 11.5 you get back into ops and debt, are essentially what the city manager and the commission weigh in on annually. I bring it up because compared to 156, 11.5 that we argue and wrestle over is obviously a lot. It's less than 10% of the total. We make a lot of decisions and we do a lot for this community on 11.5 mills. So the city budget breaks down in this manner. It's 156 million total, 4 major categories in terms of where we spend and generate our revenues. And again, property taxes supporting the general fund, which is $32 million. Of that, just a bit over 20 million are the people that work for the city. 3.9 million in taxes supported that fund. That's at 6.6 mils. Property taxes under debt service, similar breakdown. We have $27 million annually that we're making payments on. That's the annual payment. There's $240 million in debt. 27 million is what that annual payment. So we have $2.8 million in taxes, or 4.9 mils going towards that debt. This is 19. I show you that, and then I can show you the 2020 budget. You don't see a whole lot of differences there. You don't see major increases or significance. You actually see a reduction, again, in the debt service side. And on the property tax side, for the general fund, you actually see us spending less money in than we budgeted in 2019. And that's a trend. In 2016, we spent $32 million in the general fund. We're back, 2020, 40 years later, we're still $32 million in the general fund. We have held our operations steady because of a flat mill levy. And our other revenue streams have stayed flat. Sales tax from 2015. You got 6 years of revenue in all of these categories. The most significant increase is back to 15 and 16 in property taxes. And then into 17. Virtually every other revenue source that we rely on, major revenue source, has been flat for 4 years. It has made operating very difficult. And that goes into every departmental budget for personnel, contractual services, and commodities. Those breakdowns are evident, and we can share those with you as well. This tries to portray to you our major revenue streams have stalled, and it has impacted the way we do business. Just a further breakdown of the debt and how that mill levy has fluctuated through the years. I also point out 6 years ago, there was a lot of concern over the amount of debt the city had. We've dropped that significantly. And as those special assessments and a lot of those subdivisions continue to roll off, we'll see less and less debt. Our subdivision growth has slowed for a variety of reasons. Our city at large debt has held fairly constant. So the bond and interest fund is impacted obviously by the amount of debt we issue that then mill levy supports a fraction of. For every $1 million that we issue in debt, if it's 100% supported by property tax, it'll raise your mill by 0.2. Each year we look at anywhere from $10 to $15 million in new debt. Each year we look at $10 to $15 million of debt retiring. That's how your mill levy stays fairly flat and consistent. We see that trend continuing. As we take on new projects, that's really why I provided you this little chart. It gives you an indication when we talk about a $10 million college in Kimball Avenue project and it has a mill levy support. Not all 10 million is property tax. We break that down a little later, but you'll see not the full picture is borne by that property tax. But if there's portions of projects that are going to rely on the levy, this is how it breaks down. This is how it impacts that business. This is how it impacts that residential property owner. We can do a $5 million project fully supported by property tax, and these are the impacts annually to residential owners at $200,000 and businesses valued at $2 million. You start throwing in a $150,000 home or a $400,000 home, obviously it changes this. Businesses, same way. These are just two examples, just as a frame of reference. So our debt currently being supported in the bond and interest fund that has mill levy implications are all these projects listed. Every one of them are part of that 4.7 mills. Might be portions of them, may not be 100% of the project funded by the mill levy, but every one of these currently is receiving mill levy support. I spent a lot of time with Bernie and Rebecca to get to this list. I think it's significant. I think it's significant in two ways. One, I think there's a lot of projects up there. I think there's over 20. And that's what we've been doing over the last decade. Most of these have a 10-year life, some 15. But there's been a lot going on over the last decade. The other thing I would point out, there's a lot of significant projects here that have been done within the community to enhance Manhattan's position for economic development and growth. There are key projects that have been done on this list that have allowed residences, businesses, offices to develop in Manhattan. They have helped that valuation grow. And when we think about infrastructure that we're investing in that's aged, areas that need to be expanded, some areas that were rural sections, some areas that at one time were closed off. When you look at K177 and 3rd Street, that intersection, a vital opening to our downtown. It's hard for me to sit here and think that thing rolls off in the next 3 years because that means it was done 10 years ago, and it seems like it was just by yesterday we opened that intersection up. But that's how quick things move in our process. And this is the significance of projects that we do really within a 3-year period and how they impact the mill levy and how they impact all the debt we're issuing. They're significant in a lot of different ways, and there's some very key important projects on this list. And I offer to you, and you may have a response for me, how many of these do you receive or have received negative comments once we're done with them? I know building up to a lot of these projects, we go through a lot of process and a lot of discussion and a lot of twisting and turning, and it's difficult to do. But once we build them, I think West Anderson is one of those great examples in this community of an improvement that it took this organization a long time to do. We had designed it in the mid-2000s. We finally pulled the trigger within the last 2 or 3 years to make that improvement. It has spurred economic development, and it could further spur economic development to the west. We know there are plans near Blueville. But it has accommodated the pedestrian, it's accommodated the vehicle in a much more safe manner, and it's become attractive. we think we have a number of projects in the queue that could fit that bill. Yes, they're going to take difficult decisions. They're commitments. But when we look back at what we've accomplished and how it's impacted our community, it gets a little bit easier to understand and have that vision for where we're headed with our future infrastructure improvements. The ones in red do come off in the next 3 years. I provided the amounts there, and they do tie into some of that discussion we've had with the Douglas Center and other projects that are coming online. I will tell you the temp notes and the projects we have in the queue, they're going to do everything, and they'll level it out. We're not going to see a huge decrease in the mill levy support. In fact, it'll level itself out because projects coming off are replaced by projects coming on. Now I'm going to jump into each of the 6. We're going to give you a breakdown of where we're at, give you an update, and talk about those funding strategies moving forward. We have a $33 million levy raise. 13.4 of that will be local. We anticipate construction starting in 21. There are 3 different options that we put together for financing. 100% out of the stormwater fund. This would entail a surcharge to our customers for a period of time. There's a storm and wastewater approach, 70-30. And then there's just the property tax. You could issue the debt and support it fully by the mill levy and the bond and interest fund. This is a 10-year approach on the stormwater fund and that annual impact that we would be looking at to retire that debt. A total of $17.6 million spent over that 10-year period. We went ahead and provided a 20-year look. It reduces that annual payment, but you see you go from $17.6 million to $20.5 million. You're going to pay about $3 more million in interest if we go this route. Then you break down the levy from a stormwater, water, wastewater approach, 10-year approach. Again, you're going to have around that $17 million debt service. You could roll it out 20, and again, you're going to run into the $20 million from a total expenditure perspective. But you can see how those funds are impacted both in the water and wastewater on an annual basis, as well as the storm. And it might be more palatable to stretch it out. From a stormwater fund perspective, on that 10-year approach, each customer's monthly charge would go to $6.14, and each customer under the 20 would go to $3.60. On the 70-30, you can see those come down a little bit. We've obviously shifted some to the utilities, so the 10-year drops from $6.14 to $4.31, and then the 20-year drops from $3.60 to $2.52. The water and wastewater fund, we typically provide you all an annual increase that we anticipate. That would go from 3% to 3.75% in each of those funds, and that would start in 2021. And those forecasts are part of the budgeting process. We can obviously look at those in greater detail this summer, but we wanted to give you an idea of what kind of increase we were looking at from an annual perspective. The levy runs that debt out, obviously 10, 15, and 20 years. If we assign property tax to it, it's anywhere from 1.3 to 2.6 average annual mill levy increase. We went ahead and threw in the $200,000 home and $2 million business example of how that would impact them on an annual basis.
So before we leave the levy, I think the strategy and the thought process behind some of those options and recommendations is that we had forecast a lot in the stormwater fund as an option, and the mill levy are 2 approaches we had taken before, in addition to the sales tax component, meeting our local match obligation. This $13 million includes about $3 million for the betterments. Those betterments have always been in the stormwater forecast, so we're just doing them as part of the levy project. So that's some of that justification for utilizing that fund, and obviously the levy is a huge stormwater management piece of infrastructure. The thought process about spreading that to some of the, and that would just be a surcharge on everybody's bill. Everybody pays the same in that funding mechanism and in that billing mechanism. The thought process on the water and wastewater fund is the levy protects both of those major plants, the water plant and some of the well field, as well as the wastewater plant. And so because of that, it's an important piece of infrastructure, and certainly a lesser degree than potentially the stormwater, and that would be an actual adjustment to the rate change, so that it would vary depending on the water and sewer usage, but it would spread that over a broader customer base instead of just being a surcharge like the stormwater is. It would also include revenue from those entities who we wholesale water to. So that was just some of the thought process behind those recommendations.
We can move into the airport. We're looking at a replacement of the runway at the airport. I use $40 million here for purposes. We have a $36 million estimate that continues to change over time. So anywhere from 36 to 40 million. Some of that will change in the event we do 100 versus 150 feet. That $4 million difference is a lot of what we would be if the feds were only going to participate at 100 and we recognize we need 150. It's a $4 million difference. So we're either 3.6 million or 4 million on the 100-foot side, or 8 million if we want to go to 150. If we can convince them to go to 150, then we'd still be around $4 million, that 10% of that total. So if I haven't thoroughly confused you, there's two options out there, and the 100-foot is really about 36 million. The 150 would be 40 million. We're trying to get the feds to go with us on the 150, keeping our share at 4 million. But in the event they go 100, we're probably looking at an $8 million. 4 for our share, 3.6 roughly. 4 for our share, and then another 4 to go ahead and build it to the 150 that we all feel like is necessary. The reason, and Jesse can chime in here, the reason a lot of our debate over the 150 stays at 150 versus narrowing this thing down to 100, I believe Jesse's described it, they would take 25 from both sides. We would have gaps at every one of these turnaround spots, and we would have to basically demo and rebuild all of those gaps for that 25 feet. That increases our costs significantly on the 100-foot option. If we can go to the 150, we're looking at a $4 million bogey. I do think there's still an opportunity for us to talk with our representatives at the federal level to see if they can't go ahead and support the 150. That'll be our intent, that'll be our motive, but we obviously have some time there as well. This thing has been moved no earlier than 2022. Even if we moved in 2022, we wouldn't see a debt payment until 2025 or 2026. We've developed some funding strategies for that, some of which include a very similar approach to some of the other infrastructure we've done at Aggieville. There's a lot of economic development projects that have been funded at the airport. We could look to that as a portion of either renewal or our own tax, and then obviously leverage whatever state and federal grants we can, especially for pitching in on the extra $4 million, going to an $8 million total.
Jason?
Yes.
I know we had approached Senator Moran about this, and you said the timeline is, in 2021. But when do you foresee them at least budgeting for this or having those discussions come up? Since it's already been going back and forth about 150 and 100, we've had those discussions, and we said we absolutely, we have 150 right now, and we want to keep it Where are we on that? When do we expect anything to happen so that we can think about the 8 million or the 4 million?
Some of the feedback we're getting is there's a lot of other projects in the queue before us. So they're spending a lot of dollars in the Midwest and St. Louis and other areas. And Jesse and Ron can jump in here. I think it's really a matter of us continuing to be present in these discussions, moving this topic forward. I don't know if anybody really knows right now when the feds will put that money in the budget. But in order to make a 2022 construction or a 2023 construction, I think it would have to happen fairly soon. But
You got to start planning, right? I mean,
well, we're planning. I mean, we're engaged with our consultants. We continue to go down that, have a better understanding of what it is we need, we desire, and get the technical information. But as far as making a play politically, even our trip to NLC this March is an appropriate time to talk about that.
So just to speak in defense of the FAA and their position that they're in, they have to wait for funding to be appropriated by Congress. So right now, all they can do is plan for those funds, and so they have them programmed for federal fiscal year 21 for us to receive the design grant, 22, 23, potentially 24 for construction. But those are based on previous funding levels from Congress. So they just kind of take those levels and project out on, and Jason's right, with the other competing interests and needs that are out there in the system, and then they divvy it out. So unfortunately for us, it puts us in a tight position where we probably won't know until they know when Congress gives them funding for that fiscal year, which may be 2 years out from now.
At the earliest, though, we anticipate that the design grant would happen in 21. There has been some discussion that they may not have enough money to even fund us for the design, and so they suggested we might want to fund the design in hopes that eventually they'd get the money to reimburse us. So we did that with a land purchase that we used some of our entitlement funds for. But so I think it's, we'll have a full design process to go through. Most of that's going to occur in 21, and then that'll set better numbers for construction, and then they'll have to consider construction grants either in whole or in phases.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, the federal fiscal year 21 will kick off this fall. And so come October this fall, we should be starting some design work. At that point, the FAA will have a better idea that they will be able to provide us that grant for that federal fiscal year. We probably won't bring it to commission with the full agreement until early spring. And that's just kind of the timeline of when the FAA issues grants. But that should be done with mostly entitlement money, so usually those come up first. So it should be late winter, early spring that we bring that to you next calendar year.
so even with the design, even if they choose to fund only 100, let's say the 100 feet as opposed to the 150, would our design plan still be for the 150 instead of taking away the 25 on both sides?
Right now, we're moving forward and showing them costs on both options of 100 and 150 feet with the understanding that the city wants 150 feet. So when we move towards design, I think that's it's going to be early in the design process that our engineer will need to know exactly which one that they're going to design for. But right now, we're doing all the cost estimates on both.
I thought it would be best just to do it on the one, because we have 150 right now.
We have 150 feet right now. The FAA is just requesting that they see what would their cost be at 100 feet.
It's just more expensive to do too.
See, my question is, when does that runway wear out? I think when we heard some of the other discussions, I thought they did some core samples and said it had at least 5 more years of life.
Well, we
may have heard wrong, but
so the FAA design standards on when you're building a runway is to have a 20-year useful life, and we're over 40 years on it. And so when you have a proper maintenance program, you can extend the useful life of that runway quite a bit. But we're ending the nearing the end of it. We have had in the past 7 to 8 years about 3 different studies that have been done. A couple of them surface studies, and one with some core samples. And we're getting to the point where it will become more frequent that we see patchwork be required. When we start looking at 5 years or beyond, that is when we'll need to re-groove the runway. That is when we'll need to look at rubber removal. There's just a lot of different issues that are going to start occurring at a much higher cost and much more complex if we just had to repair. And so it's hard to put a number to it on the useful life of, the next 5 years we should be okay. We're at a point in time past its useful life that it's something that we need to continue to watch.
And my point on that is, we're talking about not understanding the FAA grant. I'm more of the opinion that we shouldn't spend any money until we secure an FAA grant, and that goes for design and all that. I mean, I would just wait, because we're not going to have to shut it down for at least 5 years, if I read that right. And so we don't need to actually do it next year if the FAA won't come through with a grant. I for sure wouldn't bet on them, giving us the money and funding the design and waiting. I just don't trust the system.
I would just add, though, that the 5 years is not at a hard number, and so that is not a point in time that we can say that is when concrete will fail. That is just a level of comfort that we may have that the concrete may stay around that long in a useful condition.
This is, again, a map just kind of depicting the areas in which runway needs to be replaced. We looked at 3 different options for the $4 million and the $8 million, and developed a 10-year, a 15, and a 20-year. The top part is really the comparison between the $4 million and the $8 million, showing the higher amounts early. 1.2 million on the $8 million, 4% interest over that 10-year period, drops to 716,000 per year if we extend it out to 20. On the 10-year and the $4 million at 4 interest for 600K. Obviously, it's just half. That's what you're looking at for all these scenarios. I went ahead and totaled the interest. I think it's always important for us to look at debt as we get into it from a 10-15 year perspective. Even though extending things out for a period of time reduces our annual cost, over the life of the debt, it runs us a lot of resources and a lot of revenue back into those projects. Sometimes it doubles it in terms of what you're spending in interest by going out from 10 to 20 years.
But we wouldn't, we wouldn't need to do anything with this for at least a year or 2, right?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it really won't service until 2025 at the earliest. We might be 2026 out there, but it's how you structure that debt once you do get it.
Just to be sure I understand the numbers, let's say, I would always worst case plan it and figure we got to do 8 million, not trusting what the government would do. So if we did it for 20 years, that'd be 4.6 million a year.
No, that bottom is just showing you the difference in interest. The top part, so it's a difference between 1.2 million a year and 716,000 a
Yeah,
year.
but I mean, what would we be putting into the bond and interest fund?
Yeah,
to finance that?
That's your total annual debt service.
4.6.
Yeah, that's not a mil. That's million.
Okay.
That's interest. That's the total interest you would pay over a 20-year
over the
period.
20 years.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I guess what I'm looking for is, what does that translate into? You had, every million was 0.2 mils.
Yeah, the 585,000 is the value of a mil. So
what would the mil value be if we?
Yeah, you'd be over 2 mils on the 1.2 million. You'd be about 1.5 on
Okay.
875. On 716, probably about 1.25 mil.
Okay. So a little bit over them. Because what I was looking for is a little correlation out of these projects of, what are we talking about? I think when we were doing the sales tax, we said if we financed all this through property tax, it'd be around 6 mils. Is that still a valid assumption?
That full 70 million gap, if it were, you'd be in that arena. Now, a lot of our strategies have changed, and
Yep.
with the airport really being pushed out another couple of years, it's one of those projects out of the 6 that I would kind of put in a category off to almost by itself. The Douglas Center, we've made the decision on, we're down the road. We're going to see that debt in the next 3.5, 4 years. This, we haven't made the decision. We don't know what that bogey is, so I kind of set it off on its own. The levy, yeah, now we're down a path where possible no mill impact if we go down either 100% storm or 70%, 30%. Joint maintenance facility, you'll see we've taken mill levy out and we moved it back into the stormwater fund. So there's not a property tax necessarily impact. Aggieville and North Campus we're going to get into, and you know there's a variety of different strategies, but yeah, the annual debt based on the mill value today of 585, it's going to be anywhere from 1.25 to 2.25.
And the levy is delayed. Also.
Yeah, I was going to talk about the timeline for the levy. At the earliest, now will be bid in April of 2021. So that at that point in time, when it's ready to go to bid, we have to put up our local match. Again, we would temp note that. So again, you're talking 2024, 2025 before it would have budget impact for debt service payments. On the airport, I do think the runway project would be a good candidate for some of the economic development renewal dollars and be a good component for that as part of that question.
We'll dive into Aggieville. As you recall, we've been working on Aggieville for quite some time. $30 million is where Olson and their consultants estimated our infrastructure cost would be. We have a TIF district established. It has a forecasted revenue stream anywhere from 15 to 20 million. We've equated that back to about 11 to 12 million in principal, which then gives us 18 to 19 million dollars in principal as a gap. And we've started to look at different strategies moving forward. I've already mentioned the EcoDevo sales tax, whether it's a renewal or the question that we would go on our own. A portion of that could be dedicated towards Aggieville. Existing or a new property tax dedication in the bond and interest as an alternative. And then looking at those dedicated sales tax ballot questions for 10 years, depending on how much of an increase you wanted to put out there, could obviously generate anywhere from 10, 15, 20 million over that 10-year period. So Aggieville right now, from a parking garage, Laramie, 14th Street streetscape, 12th Street, and Bluemont Avenue streetscape, right now the estimates are coming in at about $16.5 million. We'll have a more greater discussion on 12th Street on February 11th. And then March 24th, we'll have the garage and the facades and the budgets come back to you as well. So the next couple months, there'll be a lot of opportunity to give feedback on those current costs and design elements. I basically just took the remainder balance and forecast that out over a 5-year period to reach our $30 million total. 2.7 is probably going to be somewhere between $2 and $3 million that we would design and anticipate construction for those given years, but wanted to give you an idea of how that could be spread out over that period of time. Yes, Mark?
What is the plan on the alleys? Is it to like bury utilities? Is it strictly to tear up the concrete, put new concrete? What kind of things will all be done in the alleys themselves?
The forecasted budget of 30 million involves us going below grade where we can. The problem we're going to run into with electrical power, there's a lot of buildings in Aggieville that are on different wattages, phases, different electricity loads. Once you start combining and going into a more efficient way of handling that, you will force owners and buildings to go to a certain phase or certain wattage. That can be anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000 per owner to make that shift. So each block is going to have its own set of challenges. If we have an opportunity where a half block might be redeveloping, then that's the opportunity. You absolutely jump on it. If we have a half block that's ready to be redone, don't have a lot of change because half of it's Morrow, the other half may have already redeveloped or half of it has, then we're gonna have to get into that discussion. Do we just wanna co-locate infrastructure, try to dress it up a little bit, get the wood poles out, go back with steel, transformers get bunched rather than spread out? Those costs are obviously less. If we go below, they're a little more. But every alley as we get into it, and that's why we've kind of moved them towards the end of the chart, the timeline, just to give us the flexibility. If we were to have a half blocked surface and we've got a development on the horizon and the land's been assembled and they're ready to go, we could clearly move that design up to meet that construction period. But right now it's kind of a mixed bag. The budget's there to vary it all, but we're gonna have to evaluate each of those as we go. This chart kind of shows you 2019 through 2025. I know it's difficult to read. It really is just meant to kind of show you there's a design, a bidding process, and a construction process for all of these. We have attached this to the item tonight so you can get into a PDF and blow it up if you really want to take a look. But there are several phases that we have throughout Aggieville. We're obviously into 12th Street. We're into the water main on 12th. We're into the parking garage. We're into Laramie. And we're into 14th. So we're 1 through 5 are currently in a design phase and ready to get close to a construction phase. We have a water line on 12th Street and 12th Street itself that you will entertain a modification to our contract with McCown probably in later February. We hired McCown to be our construction manager at risk for the garage and Laramie Street. As we get into 12th Street, the designs and the consistency that we're looking for between Laramie and 12th Street, we think it'd be advantageous to hire McCown to do that as well. We'll be bringing that back to you all. There's a timing issue with the hotel being done as well. The sidewalks and the street are part of a reconstruction project. They're gonna start coming out of the ground soon. Things are gonna start picking up. By the summer and early fall, they're gonna be looking back to the city to finish that water line, sidewalk, and street. And we need to be in a position to do that. And so the design is catching up. Extending that construction manager at risk contract to McCown is part of that step. And then McCown Gordon and law company who's building the hotel will have to start working together because they'll be rubbing elbows in the field as they finish that hotel and they're ready to open with new sidewalks, new streets, and adjacencies. So we're trying to hit that timing with them so we can have these projects done by the time they open. So we've kind of split the debt service up in 2 different ways. So the top half of this is really about that initial $16.5 million. We know we have tax increment finance, TIF dollars coming in at a clip of annual revenue of just over $890,000. And that'll be for a 20-year period. So that debt service of 1.475 is for 20 years. All these revenue streams then would be at a 20-year clip in order to debt service that total $16.5 million. The benefit district in Aggieville is something we need to talk about. Do we want to implement that? If we do, more than likely it's a public hearing process. This won't be your traditional benefit district that is done by petition, where you have to have over 51% signed. That process is probably not going to work out very well in Aggieville. So a public hearing process, they'll all be invited. They can come, they can speak to you about doing this. This 5% participation is what we did downtown. It's an option. You can see between the 2 scenarios, it generates about $175,000, $30 million in projects. So it's not overly significant.
What specifically does the benefit district fund?
It'll fund the improvements right out in front of their building. Sidewalk, street, water.
Okay, for all of the area, okay.
Yeah. City water storm, we do have participation. It's modest in comparison to what we would be looking at on an annual basis. But it does have a participation factor. There's a gap. That gap also on the bottom side, you look at that EcoDevo renewal, that's a significant. But the top side, the TIF, we can accomplish a lot even without the EcoDevo renewal or some sort of dedicated sales tax, but it would have a property tax implication. It'd be just less, about 3/4 of a mil, and you'd be looking at anywhere from $15 for a homeowner to $310 for a business on that 3/4 of a mil. So that top part is really the initial $16.5 million, moving forward with TIF revenues helping significantly for the garage and other components. The bottom $13.5 million is really the balance, and it's a 10-year approach. So it's more aggressive to get the streets and the sidewalks done, pay less in interest, don't have that dedicated 20-year revenue stream, but could go out for a question to help fund $15 million of that principal and interest. Then you would have offsetting revenues picking up the slack on benefit districts, city, water, storm, and then the gap with the property taxes is almost the same as it is on the above scenario.
Go back to the benefit district. So they can, with 51%, they would become a benefit district or petition. Is that right? Is that right?
Probably wouldn't pursue the petition route. It's just problematic given as many owners as we're going to deal with. And I say that because of what we experience downtown. You end up, much like our alleyway discussion, it's an improvement, commission's behind it, supports it, would like the owners at 5% to participate in the benefit. So we set by hearing, we'll notice everybody. There's a protest period after the hearing. If passed by the governing body, then they can go out and generate their own list of signatures and protest it if they have enough of that percentage. It kind of works in reverse versus requiring them to go get over 51, requiring us really to go get over 51% of the owners to sign the petition. We'll hold the hearing, we'll set forth the funding mechanism, we'll put the rules in place, and then if they want to protest it, they can go get the signatures to do that.
And we're going to capture 75,000 or 100,000 depending on the year we choose, 10,000 or 20,000?
Annually.
Annually,
Yeah,
right.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yes, and it helps with that overall debt service that we're looking to all these revenue sources to assist with that debt.
We would have a city at large share too, so it's also a financing mechanism for ourselves to be able to help finance that particular component. But it does put some participation from the businesses, which is the model we use downtown. I might also point out that the city, and mainly the water, I don't think there'll be stormwater and not so much sewer, sanitary sewer, but we do plan to replace all of the meters and service feeds to all the businesses as we go through and redo the streets. And that's what we did downtown, a significant project in and of itself. So taking advantage of those streets being ripped up and replaced gives us an opportunity to put in new service lines that'll last a long time.
Beat that a little bit more. How is the benefit district costs assigned? Is it square footage of the buildings, more or less valuations?
I think there's about 3 different ways, maybe 4, but you would have to determine which one you want to apply and move forward. For downtown, we kept it fairly simple, and at 5%, it comes with their annual property tax, so it's a whole line item to itself. But our approach, more than likely, either going to be a lineal foot or a square footage.
That's for future discussion.
I don't think we'll get into the shares in this one, which we do sometimes in our subdivisions. Yeah, thanks, Ron. So something we've been exploring for some time. This is in a qualified census tract. It's in a area where new market tax credits or opportunity zones can be explored. Manhattan does have some experience with new market tax credits, not necessarily the city, but we've had developers leverage new market tax credits in the community. Dial did it a couple times in the downtown redevelopment project. I believe another private development has leveraged those dollars. With the $16.5 million in public infrastructure, including the garage, we've engaged with a company out of Texas that has assisted other municipalities in building parking garages. They have experience in Norman, Oklahoma. Jason Smith, our chamber CEO, kind of led us down this path and made a contact for us. We've had some good conversations, and they're pretty excited about where we're headed with Aggieville. They feel like it checks a lot of the boxes, and that $16.5 million investment could generate around $3 million in new market tax credits. It's a 7-year payout. Once that project would reach a point where the allotment from the federal government would go through a certified development entity, a CDE. There's a lot of information out on the web about new market tax credits. It's through the CDFI with the federal government's. There's established CDEs. There's billions of dollars worth of projects that have been funded across the country over the last 15 years. This could be one of them. We're exploring it now with this consultant. If CDE is interested, which verbally they're telling us they feel like they will have an interested CDE, then we'll start working through the process to leverage new market tax credits for Aggieville. We'll definitely keep you posted as we work through this process. This consultant is really working only on being paid if we do get the credits. So we've looked at an agreement with them where we won't owe them anything unless we are awarded credits. Credits are interesting. There's a 39% application. So if you have a $1 million project, $390,000 can be available via credits. That 39% then is chopped up a number of different ways. When I said the city would be eligible for 18 to 22% of that, the remainder of that 39% would be going to other entities, whether it's the CDE, the attorneys, the accountants. It's everybody who really has a finger in this thing to make it work. We don't get the full 39%, but we would get between 18 and 22% of the total deal. So going out of the gate with this $16.5 million is going to allow us to leverage more in new market tax credits. Salina used these when they built their indoor recreation center downtown. I talked with Michael Schrag, their city manager. He was the deputy at the time, and he asked me, he goes, how much are you leveraging? I said, at the time we thought it was 2.5, but now it's closer to 3. And his comment back to me was, it's a lot of paperwork, it's a lot of time. I wouldn't do it for anything less than $1 million. So, but it will take quite a bit of staff time and a lot of energy and effort to get that CDE to a point where they're comfortable working this deal. They do like the garage. They like the ground floor office retail space. They like the police presence in the garage. They feel like that security and safety is something that those CDEs like to see. They love the adjacency to the university, the opportunity for any type of startup business, economic development driver being within the Aggieville district or within the garage, all pluses as we move forward and further define this. Wanted to provide you that update this evening, though. Any questions on the new markets?
What's CDE stand for again?
So CDE is a certified development entity.
Got it.
And that's really, that can be banks and investors, folks who really need help because they make too much money on the federal side to reduce their income taxes.
With regard to our options for the parking garage, I'd like for you to be cautious about what you commit to so that we have more flexibility.
Commit to in respect to what?
Well, I don't know. You were just, you mentioned several things that that company is interested in. And
oh, yeah.
One is the police presence. One,
yep.
We can't change the university adjacency, of course. I mean, I don't remember all of them, but I would hate to have you come back to us and say in this grand parking management scheme. Oh, we've got to do that because we committed when we did this certified development for tax credit thing. I just like to be be conservative as we make commitments early on.
Sure.
What did you say we would get from the new market tax credits if everything, let's say everything goes really great?
So the $16.5 million would be the basic project cost.
Right.
We would get anywhere from 18 to 22% of that total.
I want to just be optimistic
Yeah,
if all
if-
things fell
yeah.
in, but if they didn't.
If 16.5 is the project amount and they are awarded new market tax credits, 39% of that total will become available from the federal government. We'll get 18 to 22% of the total project cost, 16.5.
Is there someone that does that type of paperwork, or it falls on our staff to do?
No, what I've seen so far, there's a lot of work that's done behind the scenes for us even. So we hire Olson to go out and do a geotech. They're out taking soil samples. They're out researching the site in which we'll build the garage. We have contracts with McCown to be our CMAR. We have surveys of the property. They want all that. They want everything. Documents and resources and all the information. If you are an investor in that garage, they're gonna want it. So yeah, that's the type of thing we're assembling. We've just been in this about 2 weeks with these guys since we've re-engaged. I anticipate, I mean, they wanted the redevelopment plan for the TIF. They're gonna have people looking at every piece and part of what we've been doing over the last 5 years and what we'll continue to do. So all the packets that we're gonna have on February 11th for your work session and March 24th, they'll get as well. They're gonna want to know every little detail of this project.
Yeah, I really would like for us to look at it only if we feel at least there's a 50 to 60% chance of getting it. Otherwise, that is a lot of staff time, and we have so many things going on. So if you feel like this has a lot of potential, certainly I think it's in our best interest to pursue it if it helps out with the financing component.
I'm optimistic, and I would just share with you, the last time I had contact with them was September, and we had been exchanging an agreement, and they went silent. They went silent for 3 months. And then here within the last 2 weeks, they've been like, yeah, no, we're really interested in what you got. And we've had some conversations with others, and they're really interested in what we have. Okay. So I'm optimistic.
Good.
So the main takeaways I have for this, for you, and Ron mentioned it, that city at large exposure on both, you know, the initial 16.5, the next 13.5, that bottom scenario on the 13.5, there's the Eco-Devo renewal, so that's $1.5 million a year for 10, so that's $15 million, and then you got the gap and the property tax, $325K for 10 years, that's another $3.3 million. So you've got another $18.5 million in revenue that we're gonna have to figure out locally on the remainder. Now, some of that, you know, may be out a few years, but the initial 16.5 obviously offset a lot by TIF and these other revenue sources. So we're sitting in a similar scenario for the full 30, whether it's the initial 16.5 or the follow-up 13.5 on the property tax, if you can leverage 15 million somewhere on a sales tax. A lot of decisions coming your way in the months to come. As I mentioned, the work session on February 11th, the 18th, we've been talking with McCown about amending that contract to get them in a position to where they can build that water line, finish 12th Street, do the streetscape. We have a development agreement we'll be sharing with the hotel and getting reactions for their participation in that water line. They're going to help us pay for more owed to the hotel. About 85% of that will be them. Will be a very small percentage. We'll take it on then to Bluemont, which will pick up 100% from that point forward. We have a legislative meeting, more than likely, to set that GMP. There is some discussion that possibly that GMP for the water line can be done in February. We'll see if McCown is able to get that far. If we split those, then the street would come later. April and May, the work session on March 24th, we're going to get into heavy parking garage detail. That parking management plan is taking shape. We've met internally, we've given some feedback. So we'll have some more discussion for you on that. April and May, probably looking at that water line starting construction in that time frame, and then roll into the summer and early fall for the street, sidewalk, and all the lighting and different things that are associated with 12th Street and that Bluemont Avenue sidewalk. Summer of 2020, we'll get back into the phasing on the parking garage. We'll be looking at designs for Laramie and 14th Street, possible GMP over the summer, and then that construction phase beginning sometime late summer, early fall. That parking management changes, we'll have to think about when we want to implement those. If we're under construction, we take out another 80 stalls. It'll be 147 total stalls that have been impacted by either construction, sale of the hotel, on-street parking removed. So about a quarter of Aggieville's inventory will be out of commission. So that gets us into the park and trying to regulate parking on that northern half, if you recall some of those scenarios. So we'll be talking about that too. North Campus Corridor, we'll jump into $43 million worth of improvements. We've committed to 10 recently with College and Kimball. We have $17 million in non-city funds committed. That includes city university, which are technically city funds, but we've always had a process on how we spend those with the university. It's $500,000 for 20 years, $10 million total. $3 million from K-State Athletics paid out over a 10-year period, and then the 4.2 from KDOT, which is looking like that money will show up around 2021, 2022 time period. Leaves us about $26 million gap in funding, and the usual suspects here for how we would approach that, similar to Aggieville, whether it's part of that renewal, part of a new tax dedicated, or part of that bond and interest that supports our mill levy, the mill levy supporting bond and interest. 10-year debt service and 20-year debt service on North Campus. I'm really just trying to highlight the difference in interest. A lot of similar revenue streams, but the $43 million can convert to either $62 million in total debt service or $74 million in total debt service. And that $12 million gap just remains out there for us to think about. I know we try to get more aggressive with debt in that 10-year period because all those projects on that list previously, there's a new set of challenges in a decade, and they just continue. And to debt service things for 20 years, you kind of stack things up. Versus 10, you can kind of cycle and let things expire and bring these things on. You debt service too many things for 20 years. There are communities that have debt service policies that 10 is the max. And only by special consideration do you even consider 15 or 20. Obviously, we do a lot of special assessments, we do a lot of benefit districts, we go out 20 for that infrastructure, and that's acceptable by the marketplace, but city at large debt, typically most communities are running at 10. So this is that breakdown of the whole $43 million. There's a lot of different projects that are associated with this. North Manhattan, College Kimball, those are both in the queue. And then really the next slide is just a remainder of what is to take place in 20 through 2024. These are numbers that we've used in our build grants. These are numbers that have been scrubbed by our engineers and our consultants. We feel fairly confident in them moving forward. So 32,250 is kind of the remaining number of projects to accomplish moving forward. Significant ones, obviously, West Kimball is a large project that's currently under design, and then the Kimball and Denison intersection, a very large infrastructure investment as well. Obviously, more there on Kimball, North Manhattan, and Denison Avenue as well.
I think, sorry.
So let me pull up a map for you, Mark, because some of this. So we've got. I'll blow it up for you. 10. So these are the sequencing numbers. So West Kimball is 10. East Kimball is 9. So it's about 500 and some feet from the intersection from College and, or from Denison and Kimball, and about 500 and some feet from College and Kimball. This is what's currently under design today. We're about to bring to you all Section 9, which will be, this is what KDOT is essentially funding, and right now we feel like their $4.2 million will fund almost 100% of that project, which is a benefit back to the community and our relationships with KDOT.
Jason?
Yes.
I'll jump in on the numbers. That map, that's an old map, and actually 9 is the yellow one, which is in front of the football stadium, and 10 is the KDOT grant that we got, which is that curved area. So sorry about that. Must be an old map.
Yeah. We provided the
So
chart in the...
We're currently under an agreement already for design of the Kimball West, which is the phase in front of the football stadium that stretches pretty much in between College and Denison. We're bringing a design agreement here in the future, near future, for the phase between Denison and North Manhattan, which has that curve, and that's the one that we're awarded the KDOT grant.
So this chart was in your packet, and it's going to have the right number on it. So 9 being West Kimball, 10 being East Kimball. So yeah, we'll have to update that map. I grabbed an old one. But this chart was involved in your packet, and you can kind of look at. I think Rob even, he described the 550 feet west and east of those intersections in there. Apologize for that confusion. Did you have a question too, Mary?
Yeah, I was gonna say, you know, when you look at the roundabout that's 2024 for Denison and Jardine, it says 2.7 million. By the time that year comes around, I have a feeling that's gonna increase by a lot more.
It could, and I know our staff has an opinion on that roundabout. Not sure we'll need it,
Yeah,
but it's something that was part of the design,
right.
part of the vision. Obviously, there's discretion on all of these projects moving forward. That one, I think, will have a pretty lively debate by the time we get there.
Because it's
whether or not-
very congested, kind of.
And there's a signal there at
Right.
Jardine and Denison today that functions. The roundabout was probably more of a beautification of that area and entry into campus, core campus.
Yeah, because that's gonna be, yeah, that's gonna be huge. That's
Yeah.
gonna be pretty big, kind of like what we did on Scenic, almost.
And I don't know if there's a whole lot of room to get that
Yeah,
big.
that's right.
You might end up with more like a Fourth and Bluemont type of scenario. But
Right.
it needs a lot more engineering to determine just exactly how far we can go. There are restrictions, though, that have been identified.
And it's a high-traffic area.
It is.
So we want to make sure, okay.
So the remaining revenues for North Campus, $6.5 million in City University. We dedicated $3.5 to College and Kimball. As I mentioned, the KDOT grant, which we'll do segment on East Kimball. We got $1.5 million that's still sitting in the Economic Development Fund that can assist with the Kimball and Denison project. That was part of our MBAF commitment that we made, the $5 million total. We still have that balance sitting there. This is the scenario for funding for Kimball and College. Just a review, a recap, just so you're aware, all the different revenue streams going in to that project. We anticipate capturing some revenue streams to actually buy down debt to avoid a lot of the interest costs associated with this project. North Manhattan, project that'll be in front of you this spring and summer. It's that final segment of the roadway. We've improved it from Kimball basically to Baker's Way today. So we need to come over the hill and reach down to Claflin Road. estimate's 2.9 million. We think that might be a little high. We might be able to get that down closer to that $2.4 million figure. Right now, the economic development forecast has 2 million plugged for this segment. There's been $2 million increments that have been forecasted in the EcoDevo fund for North Manhattan. All three segments total around $2 million out of the EcoDevo fund. That's $6 million out of the EcoDevo fund dedicated to North Manhattan in the forecast today. When we get to issue that debt and we come back before you all, we'll make those final decisions on that annual basis. But right now, those three projects have economic development funds dedicated or forecasted for them. There's a significant stormwater project as you come over the hill and you go down towards Claflin, and Brian has about $400,000 set aside in that fund to assist with that project.
Jason, is that 3-laning curb and gutter?
Yep. It'll 4-lane, but gives you some turning lanes too. East Kimball, as we mentioned, that $4.2 million grant. This may have changed a little bit even from the time we put the slide together. Brian said we may not get it over 3 years, we may actually get it in 1 year or 2 years. We'll see. But anyway, it's going to cover a very large, if not the majority of the project. We'll have some design costs associated that we'll have to cover. We anticipate February 4th or the 18th for that design contract. Bid letting not until probably July of 2021. So this is kind of a 2-3 year approach to where we're headed with North Campus. I've mentioned the East Kimball design coming before you. The North Manhattan polls will be a sole source item on that February 4th agenda. I think that's where we landed, the 4th. So that'll be on your next agenda. We'll try to get those ordered. There's an 18-week lead time on that. So if we get them ordered by February 5th, they'll be here by July 4th, and we can actually get that signalized, that intersection signalized over the summer, and avoid some of the conflicts with the university opening back up in the fall. In spring of 20, North Manhattan will start. Construction then starts in the summer. Over the winter, we'll look at a West Kimball bid scenario that's under design today. It's another significant section of the project. And then in the spring, summer, fall of 21, we'll look at that North Manhattan Streetscape Award. We've done all the infrastructure projects curb to curb, and they'll have some sidewalks, but there's a landscaping streetscape lighting project along North Manhattan that we'll have to work into the process in 21. We don't want to do it as these 3 phases have been under construction. We wanted to wait for the road to be done, and then we'll move forward with that. Summer, fall of 21, then we're looking at East Kimball bid and award, and possibly then moving into the Kimball-Denison design phase.
Just kind of to recap on these projects. So, as Jason said, we're contemplating bringing some of these to you very soon next week on the design contract with KDOT. So obviously the great thing about that KDOT grant is they're paying 100% up the construction up to $4.2 million. We have to cover all the design and any right-of-way. We don't anticipate that we'll need to acquire any right-of-way on that particular project, but we do have to handle the design. We've already paid for 30% of the design, so this would be to finish that and get that out to bid. In conjunction, the North Manhattan project, I would just say I think it's critical that we finish that roadway. There's going to be lots of construction on Kimball to the west of North Manhattan in the next couple years, including starting this year. We've awarded the college project. So getting that North Manhattan corridor done and clean to handle a lot of volume of traffic as we move over to Denison and Kimball and College will be important as a route into the university to handle traffic. So that's the other key one. Is the other factor there is that'll be next week is to pre-order the signals, which again company that we typically work with on that is way behind from a lot of the flood damage. But again, we would provide those to the contractor, so there actually could be some savings because there won't be markup on it, and we can store them if we get surprised. So having them done for that to be ready is still going to be a challenge because it is quite a bit of a lead time, but I think it's probably doable. So those are the two key things from that, as well as then hopefully having successful bids for the North Manhattan project. And then we'll have, we can kind of wait on the West Kimball project that's under design right now until after the election to determine where we get some potential more funding from.
That's good. That's a silver lining from KDOT. We don't. That's good. Let's take it before they change their mind.
I brought this up earlier, again, just a reference point for all the different phases and projects. There's one attached to your packet as well. Douglas Rec Center, as I mentioned, a decision made on 12/17 last year. Debt impact starts in 2024 for that project. These are the 3 scenarios we laid out for the commission at the time. And again, we'll have to look at that budget once it rolls around. Joint maintenance facility. This is where, as I mentioned, we slid 7% out of the bond and interest fund and inserted it in the stormwater fund. So that was prior 19%, now it's 26% of the total. And these are annual fund revenues that we'll need to offset that debt service on an annual basis. As I mentioned, we're out for construction manager at risk proposals right now. I believe one of you will be helping us pick that company as we move forward, and then we can start refining these estimates. We have talked about starting to gain some momentum with the existing property, both at the street shop and potentially even starting to talk about the water and sewer distribution facility over on Anderson, but primarily at the street shop we have interest from a community member. It may behoove us to start moving in that direction and putting that property out just to see what kind of results in bid process to sell that. That money obviously can be used to help offset some of these payments, which were factored into some of those forecasts that we did previously. This community member has been after us for several years to put this property on the market, so it'd be an opportunity. Yes.
So maybe I've dozed off. Which things changed to get the property tax thing alpha out of that?
Stormwater increased by 7%.
Okay.
It was 19%, now it's 26.
Okay.
Yeah. And from a justification perspective, I mean, all personnel within all of these, whether it's water, wastewater, storm, and park and recreation, will be in the facility, occupying space. So there was an attempt early to try to figure out the equal cost shares. Shifting that into storm from a fund balance perspective and an annual rate of increase, it's not going to be overly significant from where we were.
So what I find interesting about that is, 86% of the cost is the water department, but do they use 86% of the facility?
86 from a utility perspective? Water,
Well, if you had
wastewater,
30, 30, and
storm.
26, that's 86% of the cost, right? That's being put into the water department and the water funds and therefore the bills. Does that make sense?
And I would have to look to Brian, and I know Rob helped put some of that together. Eddie did too. As part of that plan that was put together, there were breakdowns of the number of employees. We can get you that. I think we feel pretty comfortable, and obviously that's where the revenue sources are too, when in terms of those supporting all those people, all the infrastructure, the equipment, but we could provide that breakdown in terms of just number of personnel actually within each of those different departments.
And I think as we go into the design, we'll have to look at, and we'll have to look at the cost of the process, you'll be able to see the layout, and a good amount of that is allocated to fleet and the mechanics, and I won't say it's 86%, but whether I would say that half the bays at least will be more supported by utilities than just about anything else. So again, this is a concept for how we fund that, and as we move forward, I'm excited. I saw who all proposed on this, and I think there were 6 different teams that proposed on the CMR, all very high quality, all with great experience and in any number of similar type facilities. So I think there's certainly an opportunity for really to get some good value for the project.
Yeah, I guess, Mike, I like the maintenance facility. I think it's important that we get that fixed. I mean, I support that. I'm not sure about the funding, but my concern is that, I don't want to raise property tax, but I also see that if you're raising the water bill, it's just avoiding raising the property tax. We're still raising taxes on people. And I'm not sure I like that. It seems to be sort of dishonest to just, throw in the water bill and say, there, your water bill, but you're not really paying for water. And to me, the mission of those enterprise funds was always to, produce stormwater, sewer, regular water at the best price possible. And we seem to be diverting as much money as possible out of those funds to handle everything else. And it's just like a property tax, except now it's a hidden tax. And, I'm more open to saying, fine, if I have to raise the mill levy to pay for it, okay, that's more honest than saying, hey, guys, your water bill is going up because why? It's costing us more to make water? No, because we're using it as a hidden tax, and that just disturbs me a little bit. Yeah, and I'm not a big guy on raising it, but if that's the only way you can get essential priority things, that's more honest to me than going at it this way. I mean, it's a dilemma.
Yeah, I think there's different ways to look at that. I mean, water being delivered, sewer being taken away from your home, stormwater running away. It goes well beyond the plants.
Yep. And I understand, like on the streetscape, if you're fixing a water pipe in there, yeah, that's good use because it's a water pipe.
Yeah.
But some of the other things that we do with the water fund, I just think we gotta really relook that, and people are getting upset about those water bills because every year, what's our projection? Go up 3%. Now we want to add, let's make it 3.7 because we're going to build this stuff. I'm not real pleased with that.
Understood. So the EcoDevo renewal, I just want to cover this briefly. Just again, breakdown. You've seen the totals. That half cent generates a little over 5 million. We get a little over 3. The county gets a little over 2. Our 30 million over that 10-year period has been broken down over the last decade. Bond and interest and debt service receiving 10.5 million, 35%. Another 65 goes to jobs and infrastructure. So the options for either a renewal or ballot questions are kind of listed here. If we maintain our approach with the county, we can forecast about $3 million annually. If we go out for another half cent question, obviously generates a significant amount more, given all the businesses in Potawatomi County that are in the city limits that would contribute towards this total. City questions, much like the .3 discussion, it raises that tax as well. This 895 only stays 895 if this goes away. If this is renewed, then I don't think there's really a scenario where we're asking an additional half-cent sales tax. But we might be in the ballpark for asking, a specified 10-year tax to help offset costs associated with Aggieville or North Campus Corridor. Those are really the two that we see the biggest gap in finance moving forward, and just how do we want to approach those. Both those scenarios I gave you had about $15 million coming in from some source, 15 in North Campus, 15 in Aggieville, to help offset some of that property tax or city gap in both of those projects. So it's something to think about as we move forward. There's a lot we covered tonight, and we've taken a lot of time to do it. What I would come forward this evening for decisions moving forward, a bond and interest strategy that will allow us to position ourselves over a multi-year approach. Clearly, there's a lot in the queue, and to make decisions today that impact 2025, 2026, and 2027 are difficult to do. I mean, decisions that were made in 2015, 2016, even 2014 are impacting us in our budget deliberations today. That's how far in advance you have to start looking and trying to get a feel for just what that mill levy will be, how much it'll support. Traditionally, over time, we've been able to keep our mill levy support in the bond and interest fairly flat. With a strategy to maintain that flatness or possibly even inching it up on an annual basis, I think we can position that bond and interest fund very well for the future, even to handle some of these more significant projects. The best example I have is we had $35 million downtown redevelopment, city at large debt. This went beyond water, went beyond benefit districts, went beyond STAR, TIF, TDDs. We bore that debt in the bond and interest fund, relied on the levy, and the levy really didn't get out of whack. There was this fluctuation there of about two or three mils. And we bumped up around 8 or 9, and we came right back down after a few years. That valuation is huge. When you think about property taxes and valuations, and you think about the investments we're making and what it could facilitate along Kimball Avenue, you've heard from the foundation, you've heard of the investments that are being made, you've heard from K-State Athletics and all the investments they're making. Research Park next to North Manhattan, the investments being made there. Generating more revenue for the community, increasing that base valuation helps that levy in the future. Where you put your dollars matters. Advocating for a strategy to look at that bond and interest fund for the future. So we're positioned well in 2024, 2025, 2026, when some of these projects may come online. We did that for downtown. We held that levy where we needed to in order to absorb some of that debt. And we absorbed a substantial amount. Operations, you heard a little bit last week from our departments, and what I highlighted earlier in that 11.5 mills with 4.5 roughly in bond and interest, 6.5 roughly on the general fund side. It's critical we look at those two together, and we have a strategy moving forward. They're linked. It's basically what we talk about, as I mentioned, throughout our entire budget process. Getting an understanding of where this governing body's vision is for our operations and our debt over the next 4 to 5 years is very important. We can start positioning ourselves today for the future. If we just look at it at an annual basis and we're just trying to fill a gap for a year, I feel like we're going to fall short. We're going to fall short with that governing body and that community 2024, 2025. I'd really like to work on a vision. I'd really like to work on building that base, having that foundation to where we can operate. Right now, we have a $3 million cash balance. That is up from $2 million just a year ago in the general fund. We operated about $32 million a year. $3 million is less than 10% of that total fund. You go to any other first-class city in this state, you're not going to find very many at 10% or less. Just in a quick survey of Salina, Hutch, and Lawrence, they're all 15, if not 25%, meaning that cash balance should be more $6 million, $7.5 million, and that's what we're seeing in our peers. They're well equipped to operate. Every year, we, on a monthly basis, watch our cash balance because it fluctuates greatly. Our operations fluctuate greatly on a monthly basis. We have to keep an eye on it. Our cash balance is something we budget for every year. We assign sometimes a levy to make it whole. 2018, we had a hiring freeze for a half a year. because we received revenues less in sales tax than we anticipated. Last 6 months of 17, we're on a downhill slide that continued in 18. Our 18 projections based on the first 6 months of 17 left us in a quandary. The hiring freeze. That hiring freeze for 6 months only saved us about $300K. We pulled revenues from other places and pulled money out of cushion in order to operate. We can't continue to do this. And most cities are not positioned to do this the way we're doing it. We're running on razor thin lines. We need a foundation underneath our general fund in order for this organization to deliver the services everybody expects. If we keep at 10% or less every year, we're month to month watching expenditures and operating in a very inefficient way. We need that foundation. If it dips into the foundation, you got the next year to talk about it. If you dip into it now, we're scrambling. We need that cushion. We'd really like to talk about that on a multi-year approach. It bleeds into a talk about a strategic plan, something that Manhattan hasn't had. And when we get into $70 million worth of improvements of a stopgap of $170 million total, and we look at all the operational challenges we have, strategic plans help communities focus. And looking at Lawrence's, they have 4 quartiles. They have a top quartile that are essentially essential services. This is an area of your organization and what we deliver for the community that really you're not going to touch. You're not even going to really question it. It has to happen. It costs this amount. This is what you're going to do. There are 4 quartiles. They have about a $240 million budget. Each quartile has about $60 million worth of expenditures. That 4th quartile, through a strategic plan, can get you to a point where if you want to focus on cuts, if you want to focus on areas that are non-essential, this is your area. Quit talking and spending so much time on quartiles 1, quartiles 2, and quartile 3. Get into 4 if that's really what you want to talk about. Holding property taxes to a certain level. How much of quartile 4 is actually property tax loaded? Understanding how we operate so we can have intelligent communication with each other about our preferences. It's hard today. When you look at 3.2 million of a $32 million budget and say, where do you want us to cut? What don't you want us to fund? Our people alone were more of an increase in the mill levy than we've had the last 3 years, which is an indicator we're robbing from other funds in order to pay our people. And we've talked about that. There's a lot to absorb tonight. There's a lot of optimism moving forward, but we also understand there are limitations. We got to get our arms around these together. Mayor, Commissioners, thank you. Happy to answer any questions if I can.
Questions for Jason?
What's the good news? So, yeah, I would like us to somehow come up with some kind of a thing. I like the idea of potentially some kind of multi-year budgeting thing, so every year it's not such brain damage where we have to have 5 or 6 meetings for 20 hours total to hash out 6% of the budget or 10% of the budget, whatever it is. And I don't know, I hate the idea of doing anything that Lawrence does, but if that some kind of a strategic plan would be a terrific idea, I think, to kind of sit down and, because this is really the first I've noticed or heard that we're on such kind of a razor thin margin within the general fund. We keep talking about how we're AAA rated with Springstead and whoever, all the rating agencies, so I figured, well, we must be financially good, other than we must have a good payment record, or I don't know what that must not be one of the major factors in their consideration of our rating. I'm sure it's a factor, but yeah, that is good to know that we don't have that cushion underneath there, and I don't know where we're going to get it or anything, but I would like, I'm glad to have an idea. We can now have some intelligent conversations about where we need to go with this.
Lestat, I thank you for that, and having that multi-year, or at least having a tiered approach where we're able to evaluate what it's going to cost and what those cuts would look like to keep a mill levy flat, to keep a water fund flat, whatever it might look like, what those sacrifices would be, how deep into the third quarter, or how high up the chart you have to go to make those cuts tangible, I think has been greatly missing. I mean, if we're always saying, well, we should cut it, but we won't, we'll just continue in this cycle, making it tangible, making things where we can, doesn't have to be Lawrence, lots of places do this, it's just time for us to do it. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work that's gone into showing us a couple of options, but also what you could do to get to this point without increasing the mill levy substantially. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm all for the idea of what I call predictable budgeting. And you know, I've been trying to push that on a couple of issues, like, you know, one is just the library, you know, taking the employee benefit fund and putting it in the charter ordinance so it'll never go over 6 mills. That's predictable budgeting. And then you know from a starting point it's not going to sneak up on you. And it might in the future because it could exceed, because you're talking about personnel costs. They're exceeding, you know, what's going on, and so putting that cap on there. And I've talked about, you know, outside agencies putting 1 mill on it and say that's it. And of course we haven't, you know, finalized that. That's part of predictable budgeting. Now on this case here with you know, basically we're focusing on these 6 projects. I've had a lot of discussions with a number of folks out there, and of course many of them have basically said to me that, you know, the challenge for the commission is we want you to figure out how to do this with existing funds and not raise the property tax, you know, or the water bill. And that's a really tall order, but that goes into what you just said. You've got to identify, okay, if you really want us to look at that, then what is it that has to be cut? Now, you know, as I poured over this stuff for a couple days, and you had a list of bond and interest items that were coming off. And I think I added those up. It's like 1.178 million. And is that annual that we've been paying on that?
Yeah.
Okay, so what that tells me is that if that's coming off, then, you know, if we could take that same amount of money and fund part of this, we're even. And maybe with interest rates changing, we'd actually be ahead a little bit. So that would take care of some of this. The second piece, if we were going to pursue this idea of trying to do it with existing, I don't know what we've got left in the Economic Development Fund. We committed some to the Chamber for their little, you know, paradigm shift on what they're doing. And there's some funds left there, and we need to look at how we program them. But to me, the big item here is the Eco-Devo tax. And I'm not in favor of putting any more sales taxes up there. And I don't want to put on there for people to vote to raise their property tax. I think that's not going to go. I think people pretty much have decided the sales tax is as high as they want it. And if we renew the Eco-Devo tax and we do it citywide, and I know there'll be some conflict with the county over that, but so be it. I think we can do that. And the difference is huge. It's over 30 million. And then if we still split it so that 35% or perhaps more goes to the bond and interest fund, you know, now you've got an interesting dynamic, because the 2011 tax was basically influencing the bond and interest fund between 0.9 and 2 mils each year based on the charts that, you know, finance had on that. So if we renew the Eco-Devo tax and do the same thing, that's going to be about a 4 mil impact. And of course this whole problem with these 6 projects is about 6 mils. So I would put most of my eggs in that basket, and I would put it on the ballot this year, which is one of the questions. Why? Because more people will show up to vote. And the emphasis on that's got to be that this money does go for infrastructure, which makes a difference on your property tax. And secondly, 35% of it is dedicated to bond and interest fund. And that makes a difference. And then this will all contribute to keeping your water bills lower. And I think we can sell that, because it's not increasing the tax. It might on the Pond County side, I understand that. But there's not a whole lot of homeowners over there. And so for that part of the city, it's mostly business. And I'm convinced that that's the way to go, and that will have the least impact on the mill levy end. And then my other point on, long term is, I see a couple like the airport project. We don't do anything on it till the FAA gives us money. Without the FAA money, we can't do anything anyway. We can't afford to fix that runway without the federal grant. So you just wait on that, and if you have to push some of these things out, fine. I think the levy, we're committed, to that. So, and that's the only one that I might consider, voting for a property tax increase, because the levy to me is the number one thing. The rest of these things, I like the garage, I like all the projects, but if they have to be pushed out a little bit because we don't have the money, they can be delayed. That can be done, and that hasn't been considered. I mean, it's not going to shut the city down if we have to delay that a little bit. And that's sort of what my long-term, outlook is on strategically looking at it. And I do hope we can get predictable budgeting to where it doesn't take 6 meetings, we can do it in 2, as Commissioner Hattasol said.
Linda?
With regard to these 6 projects, I think they are all important to this community, and I'd like to see us proceed to do them. Of course, the tax part is the devil that's in the details. And because we can stagger some of them, that seems like, as Wynn's indicated, and it seems to me that staggering will allow us some breathing room as we kind of kick off here. But we do have to balance the general fund and the sales tax. I do support the renewal of the economic development sales tax. I think that's very practical. I think our community has benefited from having a kind of a little nest egg to spring to for economic development opportunities. There haven't been many come along, and I'm anxious for us to make our community more vibrant, and these proposals seem to me to be bringing that kind of attention to us, and so that we can, and by 2 years from now, the NBAF facility will be open, and there are opportunities on down the road that, we're in construction phase now, but eventually we'll be in the actual production, I guess you'd call it, phase. And I'm not trying to attribute too much to that, because I think I don't want to over anticipate. I want it just to be very practical. What else do I need to address? I think an operations strategy is good, as you have. I think it would help us because we kind of lurch from one project to another as you present them, not because we have the big plan, but so it would be better for the commission and the staff. And I certainly would like to have a dependable budget for all of us, the staff, administration, commission. My concern is that no matter how much we try to predict and be strategic, there's always something that's going to come along to raid the fund. It seems to me that that's a pretty usual thing. So we're going to have to develop some maybe guardrails on what's going to come to us during the year that's outside of the budget. What surprises are coming. So, because I don't want to raise property taxes either. I think we have done a good job of holding the line on them the last couple of years. When I look at the amounts for a year for the city, the school board, for us, and so it's we have to keep doing that and keep the pressure on it to keep that low. But we can't cripple, I guess, we cannot cripple our own organization without taking something off the table. Go ahead, Mark.
Just so I understand it, the economic development sales tax isn't our tax. It's the county started it for the road and bridges, and because it generates X amount of money that the city is entitled to, we divvied up our part and called it economic development, infrastructure, and property tax stuff, right?
The city has had a portion of the question for the last
The
two
city county.
So how,
questions on the ballot. The city's portion has been identified how we would use it.
so, but it's one question
It is one question.
proposed by the county,
Correct.
and then we
they-
explain how we're gonna spend our part so that people, to get the people in the city to vote for a county sales tax.
Correct.
Okay, so, so obviously we need to figure out if the county is going to propose it. Apparently they are, because they're now addicted to the road and bridges fund money from the sales tax, just like we're addicted to everything else that we've got money from. So, so then the question becomes, yeah, I sure like the idea of taxing the Pot County part of Manhattan and getting that sales tax in there too. But if the county, we know the county's going to do their sales tax and we're going to do our own, then we will have competing sales tax interests. We can try to bribe them and give them some of our money so that they drop their question, perhaps. So those are the kind of things that we need to take into consideration, because it's, first of all, yeah, it's like, well, if we decide we're gonna have an economic development sales tax, that's not our call on this deal. With renewing the one that's currently in place, that would be a discussion with the county we have to have. The city-wide, including Pike County one, would generate a lot more money, we've been told. But now we're going to be butting heads with the county potentially, and so we're going to have to chat with them, I suspect.
I think you're right on the conversation. I mean, you've got 3 different elections you could also approach.
Yeah.
I mean, every November, 20, 21, and 22 will be an opportunity.
Yeah.
We don't know, we haven't heard from the county as to when they plan on doing theirs. But it was evident at the retreat.
Yeah.
They indicated there's a willingness and a desire to do so.
Yeah.
So,
the one other question was, I had a constituent contact me and wanted to know on the levy, since a lot of the properties that are protected, especially the business interests are protected, are in Pot County, well, shouldn't Pot County be paying something toward our levy repair? And I don't know if that's possible, or what could be done to address some of that.
and that's where Ron was going with the percentage that for water and sewer. We have Blue Township agreements for water and sewer. It would be an opportunity to get revenue from those outside the city into those areas we're providing service to help pay for the levy. So that 70-30 split with the storm and then utilities actually would leverage folks from outside the city.
So, but as far as the big sales tax generating stores in there, how do we get more money out of them for the levy? Is there a way to do that?
I mean, a sales tax, it'd just be this, you know, we went out for the 0.3, it absolutely would have went into that area and generated more money from Walmart and Menards, those types of businesses.
But in the meantime, some of those are fairly good water and users, and if we sock them an extra percentage, just because everybody's getting, they would pay more that way.
We believe it'd be appropriate to just build it into our rate structure. That way everybody pays based on their water usage, and as opposed to like the stormwater, where a surcharge for everybody would be consistent. The water rate, if you did that, technically you've only got 1 meter that you're supplying to a wholesale district, and so that would only surcharge 1 customer versus 1,600 customers.
Yeah, I want to comment, further on that, economic development tax. Of course, I'm of the opinion that, we should just put it on there as a citywide tax and notify the county that we're going to do that. And they can do what they want to do, but also I understand that, the road and bridge aspect of that. And I'm not so sure we can't come up with an interlocal agreement. I wouldn't use the term bribe, but, it's sort of like that. And what happens is we say, okay, we'll share it. And I don't really see a problem with that because, see, any tax the county levies for economic development, most of it's going to be collected in the city. We're 75% of the county when it comes to, what they collect. And so I really don't have a problem sharing it with them. And that should probably make them happy because that would probably lower the tax rate 0.5 cent in Riley County outside the city limits if that came off. So that's a hell of an advantage to them. And I'm not so sure, if we can collect 65 million, we give them what they normally have for roads and bridges, and I think we're still way ahead. And so, if it takes that to make it happen, but I also think we're going to miss an opportunity if we don't put it on there for this November, because that presidential election will get a better turnout and we'll have a better cross-section of what the actual people here in the city want.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add that, as we talked about earlier, that we're kind of using certain funds to do things that aren't even what those funds kind of are. That circles in talking about water, but that circles back to economic development too, and that, as Commissioner Hattisall pointed out, this is a Riley County tax. If we want to talk about economic development in the city of Manhattan, we want to say renewal because we don't want to say it's a tax. But if we want to talk about doing something like dedicating funds for economic development in the way that we've been talking about them, that would be new. So that would be appropriate in my mind. As you're saying, the city limits, I would be all for that. I just want to point out that what we talked about in the shifting and how we kind of get to where we are with the water fund has been happening with economic development for a long time in that fund, and it's not, it's always not that clear to people on the outside that what economic development's used for, but this is a way to clear that up.
Okay, so I think, we talked a lot about projects, and last week we heard a lot about staffing and how to keep that, not only maintained, but recruiting and make sure they're adequately funded and taken care of as well, because we need staff to take care of our city, which runs rather well. Talked about reserves, having money for our reserve fund. So there's lots of money that we need and not enough revenue sources. Even if we go with, I think we're going to have that discussion about how to do the renew the sales tax, whether it's with the city and county or whether it's with the city. That's not something we're going to figure out right tonight, but we will at some point. RCPD is a big budget piece as well, and their budget is usually done before ours. And unless they're doing a 2-year one also, that impacts kind of how we do our things. So I think we need to have that conversation with the Riley County Police Department and Law Board at the same time. I pause about the multi-year strategies. I think we have the strategies as far as what projects and timelines and goals we want to meet. When it comes to the funding sources, it's hard to gauge our sales tax revenue. That's one of the things, that's why we had to cut back or, freeze on the hiring, because our sales tax revenue that year was falling so short. Property valuations are going up. The more that we build, the more robust of a community we have. Even without raising the mill levy, the property valuations go up. And unfortunately, because we didn't collect as much on the sales tax revenue, we had to raise the mill levy here and there, as well as for the bond and interest for the convention center there. I think the timeline on the projects we can control. I don't think we have to decide everything, and we heard about the levy and the airport, everything else that was discussed. So there's some flexibility there. When we do start our goal setting session this Friday, those are some things we need to really look at. What things can we control and what things do we not have control of? Things that we don't foresee, such as Commissioner Morris had pointed out, flooding. You don't know when that's going to happen, and that takes a lot of money. Sinkholes, you don't know when those are going to happen, and those take a lot of time and money. So these are things that we don't have control of, but do require sometimes millions of dollars of funding. So those are some things we need to think about. And we need to advocate and lobby for the state and federal portions of our sales tax. Not only our sales tax, but taxes in general. At our intergovernmental the Riley County Commissioners presented the HB 2498, which was the hypothetical lease fee. So if that, for the dark store theory, if those things start to happen and we start losing money because everybody's going to participate in their store being a dark store theory, we're going to have to pick up more of that piece. Property tax, what is that? Freeze, yeah, where we can only go up so high, that's going to impact what we do. The tax lid, I couldn't think of the word for a minute there. The tax lid, that's going to impact what we do. I think we are in favor of all of the projects. Nobody's been against any of the projects, and I think that's what's going to create Manhattan the place to be, as well as to bring businesses here. The economic development tasks, we will discuss that, but let's discuss, when you say multi-year range, are you talking 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? Different cities do it differently. Even school districts do it differently. When you present that to us, what do you have in mind? What do you envision with that?
I think if there's interest, we'd like the opportunity to come back and talk to you in a work session format with options. There's a price to pay for a strategic plan. Right. There are different ways to approach it. We can obviously get into that. There are different consulting firms out there that provide that service as well. So if we're interested in hearing more about it, we can give you a menu of options and give you an overview of what a strategic plan could actually do. In the course of the 20 years I've been here, I know we've approached governing bodies probably 4 or 5 times about doing this, and it's an expensive venture. It's a $250,000 to $300,000 venture. It's a multi-month, but it involves all of you, along with the community, providing a strategy moving forward.
We'll see if that's what we want to do, because the other thing I heard last week was to do one of the salary studies again and see how much that is. So we will have those discussions on Friday and see exactly where we want to be as far as a strategic plan. I think what I saw tonight is a plan. It's the funding mechanisms. For example, I don't want social services to continually come up as that's the place we can take money out of. When we have a community that is so vibrant, we also have a lot of vulnerable populations that need an extended hand or need a support system. So I don't want us to feel like that's the place we need to cut. Sometimes that's why the annual discussions we have are so critical, because sometimes their budgets are impacted. K-State enrollment impacts the decisions we make as well. The more properties that are not being rented, or more students that are not spending money in our community, that impacts our decision process as well, and that's something we don't have control over. So with that, I like the annual aspect of our budget discussion. And also, it keeps the community involved in what we're doing as far as their taxpayer money is concerned. But Friday, we will have our goal-setting piece, and we will discuss these and filter these out a little bit more. Promise not to add, from me, I won't be adding any more to your plate than we already have, but figure out how to do what we already have in place and continue to have a strong community. My major priority is to make sure we have the staffing necessary to keep the community safe and secure and functioning. People should be not worried about anything in our community. It's so easy, they'd rather just think about going out rather than worried about, is it safe to go out? Is there a stormwater system somewhere? Are there potholes all over the place? And that's the kind of community we have right now. It's very nice. And staffing is very critical for this piece. Projects we will discuss though. But I would like to hear from K-State and what do they see for the North Campus Corridor. And I don't know who's going to be there on Friday with us, but it would be good to have maybe Director Butler or some other people that are part of the budget process. If they would be invited to come, that would be great. Or even Linda Cook or somebody from Kansas State University and the Chamber, just to see what our discussions are like so they can help us as we plan a little bit more. So I didn't give you any solutions, but those are my thoughts for this evening. You heard from the rest of us. Any other comments? Okay, well, that's it. Thank you, Jason. This was very helpful. Oh, public comment. state your name and address, please. Thank you.
My name is Vincent Tracy. I live at 304 Knoxbury Drive in the floodplain. And tonight's little discussion what are we going to do on the ballot coming up in November of this year? I'm going to suggest to you that just because more people are going to vote in the national election doesn't mean that the percentage of people that say no more taxes is going to change. You're going to have a lot more people in the community who are going to finally come forward and say enough is enough. When I first became a homeowner here in Manhattan, my home was valued at $60,000 and I paid $900 a year for property taxes. Now my home is supposedly worth $140,000 and I'm paying $900 every half. I'm at the point with a lot of other residents here that we can't afford to keep doing this. I suggest that we do put the Eco-Devo tax on, and it is a tax, well, regardless of what we call it, put it on the ballot, whether with the county or without, and use that money as a funding stream. We just got noticed in the last water bill that our rates went up. All night long, we're talking about taking money out of that water fund and using it. It's just more taxing. Our wallets just hold so much money. We understand that the city has things they have to do, but let's be realistic. Manhattan has not been doing a really good job of planning for the future. As he said, the runway was good for 20 years. It's 40 years old. Why haven't we been planning and putting money to the side to take care of that? The same thing with the levy. 1993, we knew the levy wasn't sufficient. I know, I was in a boat getting to my house. Did any money get set aside every year until the government finally said, okay, fine, we'll pay for some of it? No, we wait until the last minute and then come up and go, oh, we need more sales tax. We need some other initiative to take money out of people's pockets in order to pay for something we knew was going to happen. We need that strategic planning. We can't keep going day by day, year by year, guessing what we're going to be able to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Okay, seeing no comments. Any comments from the commissioners? All right, is that it? Okay, we are adjourned. We are adjourned for the evening. Thank you.